morning. My name is Richard Wexler, and this is Caring in America, the podcast for caregivers and care recipients. We have a special guest this morning. Before we get to that, a little reminder of who I am and why I'm doing this. So go back about 19 years, minding my own business in the software industry, married later, 2 small kids. The summer of '05, we get 4 phone calls. Each one of our 4 parents is extremely ill. Are my wife and I ready for this? Of course not. We're the average American couple. Never really talked about it, never really planned. Now we're off on a new adventure that's going to last 14 years until the last parent passes away at 96 in 2019. Roll the clock back about 16, 17 years. I could barely spell the word care. Decided to leave what I was doing in the software industry. Started reading everything I could about this subject matter. Started my company, Points of Life. Was encouraged to start educating, which I've been doing for 15 plus years. As I'm getting older, pushing 70 last year, okay, still want to do this, still want to educate people. How do I even get to more people? Someone came to me and said, podcast, young man. So began this podcast. Been doing it approximately a year now, with the whole idea that we want to inform as many people as possible about the complexities of aging and care. And as I said, we have a special guest. I'd like to introduce him. Willowise was founded by Brock and Esther Sheets. Brock's dad, David, passed away unexpectedly due to COVID in early 2021. As the Sheets family was processing through this sudden loss, they decided a virtual memorial service was going to be the most effective way to honor David's life and legacy. Having lived and served as a pastor in 11 different churches across 5 states, David's community was spread out across the entire United States. Travel to a single memorial service simply wasn't possible for all who loved David and called him friend. Brock has spent 9+ years marketing, guiding the website design, producing webinars, hosting virtual meetings, and delivering virtual education for a professional defense association in Washington, D.C. Esther has a gift of empathy and caring that is unmatched. She is able to uniquely connect with families and care for them in their grief. This combined experience was perfectly suited to create a beautiful tribute website and a moving memorial service for David with over 500 people in attendance. Since then, Willowise has gone on to help thousands of satisfied people in their own seasons of loss. Are you there, Brock?
Yes, I am.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to our podcast. So I do have some specific questions for you, but before we get there, I mean, this whole genre of an online memorial, I mean, how far does that go back? Do you know that?
I don't know, except that COVID, the pandemic gave it a huge shot in the arm. So
Yeah.
I know that there may have been a small number of people who were kind of dipping their toes in the water of online memorial services prior to the pandemic. But with all the lockdowns and everything that occurred, people unable to travel just because it wasn't safe to do so, I think COVID really kicked this into high gear.
Right.
And what's interesting is that I don't believe it's a pandemic solution. That I think that there are a lot of reasons why a virtual memorial service makes sense for everyone post pandemic, and we can talk about that more.
Yep.
But there are a lot of reasons why I think that this is a trend that's here to stay, and I'm very optimistic about it.
It's interesting and sad in a lot of perspectives that this one disease, COVID, and the time that our country and the world went through this, it really has changed a lot from the way a lot of people conduct business, video calls that really weren't happening before. And then it sounds like from your industry, doing things online, and I'm going to ask you a further question about that in a second, and obviously gave you and your wife an opportunity to start a business.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so with that said, I mean, why should people consider an online memorial for their loved one?
Well, I think there's a number of really compelling reasons. The first and probably most important one is the fact that we are an exceptionally transient population nowadays. So even if somebody, was born and raised and lived their entire life in rural America, they probably still have a very distributed geographic impact, even if they've spent their whole life in one spot. And the reason is their kids have moved away, their grandkids have moved away, nieces, nephews, cousins, friends from high school, like people that have been in their life and have been a part of their story have more than likely now live all over the country. So even that person born and raised in the same house, lived their entire life there, still more than likely has a pretty vast geographic impact of people who wouldn't be able to travel to attend. And there always comes that there comes that relational math that you have to do when somebody passes away far away. I've had friends from college pass away tragically, and they're dear friends. I really would love to be able to be a part of something to celebrate their life, but just the reality of travel expenses and the short timing, I was unable to take part in those services because a solution like this didn't exist.
Sure.
And so I think that or the family didn't choose an online solution.
It's interesting. As I talk through all these different episodes in the podcast, a lot of them I can relate to personally. And unfortunately, I can relate to this. A friend that lives here near my wife and myself unexpectedly passed away last week. Exactly what we're talking about is happening. Family is flying in, excuse me, from different locations to get ready for the funeral. So, yeah, I understand that personally and experiencing that right now.
But one quick point is how many people are not able to travel to attend, because maybe that friendship is just distant enough that it doesn't make sense, to travel. But if something were held online, people would be all in,
And I totally understand that. And I know this gentleman has lived in two different states. I know he has a lot of friends in many locations. And what you're saying, per this specific example, may be exactly correct. I have another question for you. what are the components that make up a typical online memorial, Brock?
Yeah. So there's a couple of things, and the first thing that people usually tend to go to would be a live stream from an in-person service, and we can help with that. In fact, we can send out some rental equipment. So if you want to do, live streaming from the beach or a park or someone's backyard, someplace that isn't regularly equipped with an audio-visual setup, we can help you live stream that out. But when we talk about online memorials, we're talking a little bit more specifically about a fully online experience. And that's really where our specialty lies. And there are three main components that make up an online memorial. Number one would be the memorial website. And I like to call the memorial website the headstone of the future. You can include a photo gallery. We can build a slideshow video that gets included there. If there are other videos of your loved one, perhaps they performed and, you've got a video of them singing something or maybe doing a dance or, anything like that. We can put that on the memorial website. We've had, clients who were authors and have a list of about 8 or 9 published works where we put put those books with the description of the book and the cover art on the memorial webpage, and then a link out to the Amazon store where you could buy that particular book.
Wow.
So there's a lot of really unique ways that memorial website can function as a living memorial. It can contain a guest book. It can include a donation portal that links out to a cause or a charity that means something to you and to your loved ones, or maybe you're raising funds for funeral costs. So you've got a GoFundMe set up. We can link out to that. So those memorial websites are kind of the sky is the limit in terms of customizability. We also put a registration widget into the memorial website, and that's where people will register for the service. And there are 2 different parts of a virtual service. There's the memorial service, or some people call it celebration of life. Other people call it other names as well. And that would be the equivalent of, imagine we walked into a church or a funeral home or a synagogue and everybody's seated in rows and there's a podium up front and somebody goes and stands behind the podium. We have an order of service in our hands and we're moving through that order of service as planned. So that's kind of that memorial service component that we help with, and we do that virtually. And then the second component would be, we've left the sanctuary setting and now we're moving over into the fellowship hall, and we do a virtual reception where everybody has mic and webcam rights. There's no script involved there. There's no order of service. It's really just an opportunity for people to raise their hand and tell stories, share memories about their loved one, to offer condolences to the family. Those receptions really take on a life of their own, and they end up being a really joyous, almost family reunion space, because people come out of the woodworks because we've removed the barriers of, we've removed the hurdle of having to travel. So people who are pretty distant relationally, or maybe time has passed since they had a lot of interaction with this person, they can come and attend and share stories that maybe the family had no clue. We've had all sorts of fun details or stories pop up in these reception spaces as old friends from high school or old friends from college will come in and be able to share stories that oftentimes the family wasn't even aware of. So really cool time to be able to gather together. So those are kind of the 3 main components of an online memorial: the website, the service, and the reception.
This is extremely interesting, and I don't want to really assimilate it to what I'm going to say, but something like what people may be used to from a workplace environment now, where there's 20, 30, 40, 50 people online engaged in a meeting. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, correct me if I'm wrong, but what I'm seeing in my own mind is something similar where people could be in any state. I'm assuming with the internet, they could probably even be out of the country, correct me if I'm wrong there, but they're able to engage in this from whatever location they're in, the comfort of their couch. Am I somewhat correct?
Yeah, yeah. You're not limited by anything except being able to access the internet. That is, and have a device that you can do that on.
Interesting. So let's look at a scenario. So we have someone that's older that dies. Maybe the grandson, the granddaughter feels they're very technical. They can probably do this themselves and create their own online memorial. I mean, what are your thoughts about that of someone doing this themselves compared to coming to a company like yours?
Yeah. So absolutely, people can do this as a DIY project. Um, Full disclosure, I worked in the I worked in the Defense Association for 9+ years, doing websites and webinars and online meetings, and had a ton of experience when my dad passed away. Um, but I knew for his service, it was really important for me to be focused on the content, to be focused on what was happening in the meeting, not behind the meeting.
Yeah.
It was really important for me not to be the wizard behind the curtain, pulling levers and fiddling knobs to make sure everything's working. Um, and so for my dad's service, I actually hired what is now a competitor to do his service. And I'm really glad I did so, because even though I felt like their experience was subpar, and which is part of the reason why we started Willowise, was because we saw an opportunity to really do this really well. Um, but even so, even with a subpar experience, I'm still glad I wasn't the wizard behind the curtain making everything work for my dad's service, because I wouldn't have been able to be fully present
Sure.
in the content, because I would have been thinking about logistics, making sure everybody could get connected, making sure all the technical stuff was taken care of. And so to get that off of your plate is really valuable when you're in a space of grief, and you're trying to memorialize and honor your loved ones. I think it's an important time to be present and fully present in those moments.
No, and I appreciate that answer, and I hope our audience does as well. I can understand you're a talented individual, you understand tech, so on and so forth, but everything you're talking about, you're also a relation to this individual that has passed. You don't really want to be worrying about the technical pieces. Is the camera right, the microphone right? All of that compared to, as you said, really engaged in the moment. So I can see we're bringing in someone like yourself, and your company is going to make it potentially a lot better for that family. And then here comes the naive question again. I mean, this is all, in essence, tape, to use an old word. So this service is going to be around for a long time. Am I correct?
Correct. Yeah. And one of the beautiful things is, because the service is recorded, we also record the virtual reception room, and we embed those in the memorial website after the service is over, so people can come and sign up to view everything on demand.
Wow.
So it's been 3.5 years since my dad's passing,
Right.
and occasionally I'll see people from his past who will register to view his memorial service and view what took place. And so that's a really, really powerful thing to have, that I don't know that a lot of people have that in their in with their in-person gatherings.
And I concur. I mean, at almost 71 years of age now, and I unfortunately have been to a lot of funerals, and I'm sure there are people that couldn't make it to someone's funeral, and exactly what we're talking about, think, oh, I wish I was there. And now, whether it's 20 minutes later, 2 years later, 10 years later, they can go back and view exactly what happened. So something extremely special. So what makes Willowise kind of stand out from other online memorial service providers?
Real quick, I wanted to just add something to that last point that you were hitting on when you talked about people not being able to attend live, and so they'd have to watch the recording. That also goes for speakers on the order of service. So let's say you've got somebody who you want to be included in the order of service. You want them to do a song or a poem or a scripture reading or share a eulogy. But for whatever reason, the day and time that you've chosen for that service, they can't actually attend. One of the powerful things is that we can have them pre-record their contents. We can add lower thirds graphics like you see on the news with their name, their relationship to the deceased. And they can pre-record that, get that over to us a couple days before the service. We can edit all of that together. And then that can be included. They can be a speaker during the service without actually being there live.
Wow.
And then, of course, they're able to watch everything on demand after the fact. So it's not just for viewers, it's also really powerful for speakers who might not be able to make it on the day and time of the service. So
very, very interesting. Yeah. And if you can, again, talk about what kind of sets you guys apart.
Yeah. So having walked through this with what is now a competitor and having, really carefully researched, some of what makes Willowise really special is we use browser-based platforms. Most of our competitors use Zoom, and Zoom is a great platform. I don't mean to disparage it in any way, except that Zoom requires an app to download. And that small barrier doesn't seem like a big deal for 98% of the population, but there's a small percentage that struggle with that added friction layer of having to download an app on whichever device they're on. So we use browser-based platforms that allow people to enter right in through their web browser, whether that's a mobile browser on a phone or a tablet, or whether it's a laptop or desktop. They can enter straight in without having to download apps. So we've chosen things that reduce friction as much as possible. We also, I mentioned this previously, we offer video editing capabilities for speakers to pre-record their contents, or to pre-record their comments, apologies. We also, this is one of the most important things that we do, we provide really strong project management. Most people who are in this phase of grief have no idea how much work is actually about to come to them in terms of logistical things like closing down bank accounts and utilities and closing up, apartments or homes, that sort of thing. There's all of that. But then even when it comes to a memorial service, gathering photos for the photo gallery and for the slideshow video, inviting people to speak, making sure, sending out invitations for people to be able to register to attend. Those are the types of things that people probably aren't aware of when they're walking into this process. And so it's really important that we hold their hand really carefully.
Sure.
And so we do that with a really strong project management system that keeps everybody on track with the different deliverables that we have along the way.
This has been extremely interesting and something I wasn't really aware of until you and I started talking. I'm hoping this can be extremely interesting for our audience, especially as we started this conversation with people all over the United States, people all over the world, how expensive it is to travel. Obviously, if you get to a situation, maybe a brother or a sister passes, both individuals are in their 80s or maybe even older, and they can't travel anymore. So I do have one final question for you as we get ready to wrap up. So give me an idea of what makes you optimistic about the future of online memorials.
Well, there's a couple things that make me really optimistic. Number one would be the response we've gotten from clients. Um, Almost universally, everybody says it exceeded their expectations, that there's a level of intimacy, there's a level of beauty that takes place in these spaces when they're crafted well, that people had no idea was even possible through a virtual event. Um, and so that's a really that is very satisfying and fills me with hope, combined with the fact that we're only getting more transient as a population. The work from home movement has allowed people to live pretty much anywhere. So people are really kind of spreading out a lot more and taking the leap into destinations that they might not have been able to previously to live. And so now you've got this dispersed population that, we all know people far away who are passing away or nearby who are passing away.
Sure.
But we've got those distance in those relationships that mean travel would be difficult. And then lastly, just the simple fact of aging demographics. You've got younger digital natives that are planning more and more service for their parents and grandparents. So as the baby boomer generation is aging, and Gen X and millennials, and even Gen Y are planning those memorial services, or sorry, Gen Z, are planning those memorial services. I think those younger generations, Gen X and below, are much more open to this kind of possibility and more familiar with it. So it doesn't offend their sensibilities to think in these ways of gathering people together online.
This has been fantastic information, Brock. I hope my audience has learned a lot. I certainly have. If they want to get in contact with you, what's the best way to do that? An email, a website, phone number, whatever you want to give out.
Yeah. So a couple of ways. Yeah. The best way would be through our website, which is willowise.com. And that's Willow, Willo. And then there's only one W where the two words come together. So Willowise. So WILLOWISE.com. That's our website. Or you can give us a call at 208-244-0608.
Fantastic. And as I do on every episode, folks, as we get to sign off, get close to that, if you have a question, a comment, you're someone in the industry, you want to reach out to me, that email that I always give out, eldered2023@gmail.com. So once again, I want to thank Brock, and as I do on every episode, folks, until we meet again, have yourself an awesome day.